Yo, guys, so we got a draft battle between two of the top Asian teams remaining here. We got my Go Kingin just looking all pretty right now. And both teams here, I don't think they draft, like, let's say too spicy, is the way I'd put it. I think they like to play pretty reserved, to be honest, from a draft perspective, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. People have asked me recently about, like, whether or not, like, you have to play, like, incredibly psychopathic, super giga chad drafting in order to really force an advantage, right? You don't have to force your way in with like really extremely creative picks all the time, right? It's fine to go for something more conventional, and both teams have essentially opted to do that here. If you can do, like, the meta is the meta for a reason, and if you can do what's objectively considered one of the best ways to draft within this world's meta, then why not do so, right? And I think both teams have that sort of philosophy here. So it gets to the second layer where they manipulate the draft and the options within the draft in order to force certain play styles, and understanding, like, drafting to achieve a certain outcome and force the field in a certain way is another way you can make the draft work in your favor. If you as a team have determined that a certain player doesn't necessarily function as well on a certain comp, or they can't play it, or they don't like playing this certain style, then you can actually use that and force that disadvantage upon their throat, right? Like, if you force very common version of this is a lot of teams will pick the jacks early and then they will force the other team into a weak side scenario. In this case, both games with Top Esports, they essentially they lead it with the Aurora opener, and they confirm the Aurora whenever they see a matchup that they're happy with, right? So the philosophy here is that Damwon go for the Jax opener in response. Okay, so they basically disincentivize the Aurora on top side, although it would be like semi-playable. Top, instead, they use 369's weak side ability in order to basically play the Cassante into the Jax and neutralize this matchup. That is how they see this game working out, while giving themselves as many like options as possible to hold off, right? They don't draft with holes, right? They have very flawless, very mindful drafting that allows them to keep their options open for as late in the draft as possible, right? You can see both teams, they have a set of champions that will work in most scenarios, right? A lot of the insane priority picks have either been banned, or these teams are not opting to kind of go for them. You can see Ashe is dropped pretty late in the draft. A lot of teams, by this point, they'll ban out 4 AD carries and then force it into the dumpster bin. These teams have actually opted for a little bit of a different take. They end up banning a little bit of mismatch. Double support, arguably, from the side of DK, and a little bit of a variety hour from Top Esports, right? So Damwon holding it off until the very, very end. Very, very chill draft, right? Almost to the point where it's because they gave Aurora and allowed TES to give like a freebie top lane pick on 2-3, quote unquote, that it allows Top to basically pick as chill of a comp as possible on the 4-5 and round themselves off with the Ashe Braum. I'm surprised the Ashe actually made it through this draft all the way this late, because it essentially gives Top a fully blindable draft, if that makes sense. Every champ is blindable, and it gives them the most options in the most comps as possible. And this is a very unique and rare scenario where you can actually do this, because some of the picks that are priority, you've gotten so many of them, or you've gotten like a select arrangement of them that allows you to actually do this. It's a very like weird scenario. Normally you want to draft for as many advantages as possible, but neither team has given any sort of room for that, right? Basically up until R5, you would argue that there's any room for discussion here in terms of draft philosophy and in terms of flexibility here. I think there was opportunity for DK to pick more, let's say, siege, and force more of a range composition in order to counter what Top has to bring to the table, because the biggest weaknesses they have are, one, their range, and two, the fact that they can only really play front to back with their comp. They don't really have like an insane engage force. They can kind of play for pick, but they can't force anything insanely, right? So if I'm DK, I would have seen that. This is definitely a Ziggs angle on 5 for me, a Ziggs or Ezreal or something of that nature. And overall, both of these teams give very little room for, let's say, negotiation, is the way I'd put it, right? And it could be that top is just happy with the scenario because they want Kingen to try to force an advantage. They are disincentivizing that playstyle, and they're playing around it. And this is another way of looking at draft, right? Game 2 was kind of similar, except that I believe they switched sides here, if I recall. Yep, so DK actually take blue after the loss. It makes sense because if the red side draft didn't work, you may as well nuke it and try something new. So they want their first pick of the litter. Then they go for the Yone. This is a very common opener now, actually, because of the meta getting more solidified. You actually go Yone, Sedge, Jax, because it gives you the perfect 2 prio ADs, laners, and then you get someone that facilitates it. The Sedge is a really good one because it basically enables both these melee laners and creates a lot more setup for the ganks on this. And top are just down to play Cassante again, right? They, they basically have their game plan. It's the same, like, sort of, yeah, because we got Aurora, we can basically handshake whatever matchup you're down for if you reveal it, and we can just make our comp really well open. It's not a bad thing on this DK comp though, because they have the Yone priority. They always have a way in. They can win side lanes later, and pretty much so. And it's the same sort of idea, right? It's very similar draft to the first one. They basically just switch up the order and they go close on 5. And this is why I think it's not wrong to draft by the book, because top are basically taking extra care to make sure that the coast is clear before committing on their draft. And although it can be boring sometimes, this is the cleanest way to draft. And DK basically couldn't find an opening to punish him a little bit more. And to be honest with you, this could be a priority issue. Like, maybe you have to give up some bans. Maybe you have to come up with more creative picks if you're DK. If a team like top, and if you match them in terms of like the guaranteed style and the style that doesn't leave many openings, it seems that it's hard when you just give top their main core. And this is actually a really hard, I would say, draft in order to play around, because there's so few opportunities to really gain anything. So hopefully other teams like T1 or G2 or even Fly, if they make it all the way through, I think I would like to see a team like Top get exploited more for just, completely slaving and not really pushing for many advantages at all and just getting away with it. So this is a good download for those guys, and maybe I hope in their future matches, hopefully they can pull something off, let's put it that way. But this is a draft that basically, because there were so few openings, it forced the draft to be based on playstyle mainly, and forcing the game in a certain state, like drafting to achieve a certain way the game would flow so that teams would get an advantage. And that was that further emphasizes how interesting draft can be, what your objectives are from draft. It's kind of reflective of league in general, but there's something about draft that specifically that facilitates this, that makes it so interesting. So today's video is giving a little bit insight into that. So hopefully this was insightful to y'all, and I'll catch you in the next one. Stay around.